Hello, I'm your host, Giselle Gamby, and this is the Intuitive Pool Podcast, where together we'll embrace the plans we did not make, yet unfold businesses and lives that are so much greater in wealth in all ways than any business or life plan could ever achieve. My wish is that you make intuition your most trusted advisor. So buckle up, get present, and let's go. It gives me so much pleasure to introduce Dr. Carol Haddad, who I have had the pleasure of knowing since 2016. Carol is an integrative cancer care consultant who is based in Colorado. Her academic background includes a Bachelor of Medical Science from the University of New South Wales, followed by a Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery from the University of Sydney. Following her internship and residency in the Wollongong Hospital, she embarked on advanced training as a radiation oncologist in the Northern Sydney Cancer Care Centre, followed by a clinical and research fellowship in Princess Margaret Cancer Centre in Toronto, Canada. She returned to specialist practice as a radiation oncologist in Australia. During her time delivering conventional medical care in the hospital setting, she began to identify the additional needs of patients and their families that were not served well by a conventional approach alone. In 2017, she followed her intuitive pull, which I remember her rational mind had much advice to give, and embarked on an exploration of the integrative world of cancer care, which sent her traveling across South America, the USA, the Caribbean, the Middle East, New Zealand, and Europe. She gained experience and training in psychoenergetic medicine, natural and complementary therapies, diet and lifestyle interventions, and the holistic approach to treating disease and achieving wellness. Combining her formal qualifications in medicine and adding the holistic principles of health and wellness, Carol is so passionate about offering a balanced and integrative approach to cancer care for treatment and recovery, as well as for enhancing quality of life and optimizing cancer outcomes through minimizing the risk of reoccurrence and maximizing the chance of survival. What I personally want to say about Carol is that she is an angel in human form. The love and care she has for her patients, combined with her self-sought research that had her travel across the world, combined with her ability to hold the diagnosis at a causal level, there is nothing but miracles in Carol's care. And so welcome, Carol. And it also gives me so much pleasure to introduce Natalie Symes, who I have also had the greatest pleasure of knowing since 2015. Nat is a wife and mum to two beautiful children. She was a lawyer for 10 years until she had the intuitive pull to let go of that career and create a life that truly mattered rather than following the traditional route of just working for the sake of working. Little did she know at the time that this decision to make quality family relationships her priority would bring about when diagnoses of motor neuron disease, Huntington's disease, and the BRCA1 gene found themselves in her family members as well as herself. This was certainly the plan she did not make, one that has had Natalie hold illness not in the usual response of victimhood and suffering, but in a context of freedom and a knowing that who we are and what we choose does not have to be defined by our diagnosis. She's also currently following her passion of writing in another plan she did not make, a children's book collection that deals with loss and illness in families and how we can find joy and meaning even in those times. Welcome, Natalie. It's so great to have you both here. So it was a few weeks ago that I had the intuitive pull to bring both of you on this, or to invite you firstly to be part of this episode, because my experience with you is that you have held new perspectives of freedom in response to illness where the usual perspectives are ones of being powerless to our diagnoses and being victim to that. And I thought, how much freedom might be catalyzed by the both of you sharing what you've experienced around diagnoses of illness. There could be amazing freedom that could be catalyzed through people listening to this podcast. You know, and even we're talking about freedom in the context of illness, but really it could be freedom in the context of anything. And if it's freedom in the context of illness, it could be the illness of the listener or the illness of a family member. And who knows, just by having a different way of looking at things, what that might actually catalyze in their world. So that's the inspiration behind this podcast. So I would love for you to share, before you had your intuitive pulls, before those intuitive pulls opened up new perspectives and, you know, for example, Carol had you travel across the globe. Who were you before that? Tell us about your lives before that. And I'll ask Carol, would you like to go first?
Sure. And Giselle, thank you so much for having me on. So I guess who was I before I got the intuitive pull? It's funny to think about that question now is very difficult to answer, only because I don't feel different. I can only feel as I am right now. But when I think back to it, or I'm reminded for any reason, I can see how much has actually evolved. I think back then, and I'll be very transparent and honest here, I was probably the people pleaser. I was the person who wouldn't break the rules or rock the boat, so to speak. I always made sure I did what I thought was the right thing. And I think I probably would numb the discomfort of knowing that I wasn't necessarily fulfilling what was true to my heart. So I think that was who I was before I got the intuitive pull. And so to ignore the intuitive pull would have been more painful than to follow through with it, which comes with its own, as you mentioned in the bio, it comes with its own sort of chaotic disruption. A lot of the rational mind kind of tries to reason why you should stay exactly where you are, safe and secure in what you've built. But again, the discomfort of staying exactly as you are in this false sense of safety and security starts to far outweigh the comfort of staying in it. So it would have been against my heart to stay where I was. Yeah.
I love your response, actually, because what I didn't expect you to answer that question in that way, and it was even more perfect than the response that I had kind of anticipated. And the reason why I think it's even more perfect is because people are going to identify with exactly what you just said. Like, that's the internal world. That's the internal world of resistance. So I'm going to ask you, in your observation, in your field of profession, that resistance that you owned up to within yourself, that previous resistance, I should say, that you owned up to within yourself, how does that relate? How does that relate to your observations around people who have cancer?
So I think that was something that I started to gather while I was working in the hospital setting and gathering just so much experience with patients individually. And I was noticing that I guess a lot of the personality traits were similar between patients who are experiencing cancer. And I noticed how much of that may have been responsible for the disease coming on. So the emotional burden or the mental or psychological burden of either living a life that's out of alignment to what was true for them, or just a way of trying to fit into a mold that was cut for them that didn't really quite fit. So I think that inspired me to make sure I live truthfully, so that I can not just talk the talk, but walk the walk, and be able to help facilitate or inspire that in those that are now cross my path.
I love that what you could identify within yourself, you could then see mirrored in your patients or in the hospital system, as you said. And I love, love, love that you chose to respond to a place of even more integrity, to make sure that you weren't living what you could see cause the diagnosis in your patients. That you were, we've talked about the Ho'oponopono process so many times over the years. So for the listeners, please check out the Ho'oponopono process by Dr. Hugh Len, which talks about a modality of taking, it's the modality of taking 100% personal responsibility for your life on steroids. So check out Dr. Hugh Len's story about working in a clinically insane asylum where no patients were ever rehabilitated. Check out his story where he took personal responsibility for the behaviors and beliefs that would happen in his patients. He would also see that he also had them within himself. And so the Ho'oponopono process says that if we clean ourselves, we will clean what's on the outside. And not that I imagine you thought about it in that context when you made the decision to act from a place of integrity, but that's actually what was happening within you.
Yeah, I don't think it was premeditated at all.
No.
I think it was just following what I desired, following what my heart wanted to do, not knowing just how much was about to flood in, and not knowing just how much of that was going to benefit who I feel I'm here to serve in this lifetime. Yeah.
One more question, because I think this is really important to acknowledge. When you were pulled to make sure that you weren't living from the behaviors that you spoke about previously about, not rocking the boat and not causing destruction and following the rules and being the good people pleaser. And when you could see that continuing on that path would have its own consequence, for some people it's cancer or other illnesses, and you chose to be free from that and to follow your heart, your rational mind came in and knocked on the door quite loudly several times. Can you tell us about that?
Very loudly. It definitely tried to hijack the plan, that's for sure. And I'll be honest, it still does. It still tries to make an appearance and say, hey, you never should have stepped sideways. But there was something that I guess I couldn't silence, which is why it's called an intuitive pull. It's just an intuition. It's just a knowingness that you can't really explain. And as far as my experience goes now with intuition can hardly ever be explained in rational terms when it's happening. And yet in hindsight, it makes so much sense that you can only trust it when it starts to arise again, or when you start to get the nudge again, because you see how it was so divinely guiding where you were meant to go previously.
So not fair, is it? I just think, when we get that intuition and it can't be explained, it's just so not fair. Oh. Thank you. Thanks, Carol. So Nat, tell us about, oh my gosh, I just want to say this before I actually ask the question. I have learned so much from you. Like you have, similar to how Carol has opened up my world to things that I never even knew existed or that were possible. I know that the you that was here before following those intuitive pulls would never have thought about where you would end up, ever. Like that, like there's no life plan or goals that we could ever have written down or received that would have you be where you're at now and have had you make the impact And I know that you're quite more on the humble nature than the person that says it's because of me that all of this was catalyzed in my family. But you were absolutely that first one drop that catalyzed so much freedom in both your in-law family and your family when so much illness flooded your family in the last few years. So can you tell us about who you were before all of that happened?
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on the call as well. It's just such a privilege to be with you both. But like Carol, it's difficult to think back to that time pre-2015. It's not until I think back to who I was then and how that person would react to what our family's been through over the last couple of years that I really appreciate just how far I've come. And prior to 2015, I didn't have an unhappy life, but I just wasn't settled. It just felt like I could very easily be drawn into chaos and, like Carol, people pleasing and doing the right thing and being the good girl and, you know, sticking with a career that I was doing because I was traditionally smart, whatever that means, but feeling like it wasn't quite the right fit for me, and my relationships were suffering, and I could very much go into the paradigm of blaming other people for my situation. And when we first started working together, that was my intention, was for you to tell me that I was right, and of course everyone else was. I was feeling this way, and it just it unfolded after that in just such an incredible way that I never could have predicted. And going into coaching thinking that coming out with financial rewards would be what would make me happy became the least significant part of what I wanted to achieve moving forward. And yeah, the change in my relationships with everyone around me was just still something I appreciate so much.
I'm just thinking, actually, I just made the connection that we have a lawyer and we have a doctor here on this call, like two professions that, you know, if I look at I'm talking about the conventional law and medicine, you know, very, very dense in there's a right way of doing things, very cerebral, academic, very based on, you know, historical precedents. In front of me here, I've got two people who have completely elevated the conversation, not necessarily in law, Nat, but certainly in medicine, which is why we're here. So just making that connection. And I'm also appreciating, because I remember you telling me a story about your father, Nat, when you got your law degree, how he ran through the town of Lismore with your qualification in hand going, anybody need a lawyer? Anybody need a lawyer? We've got a lawyer here. And so to let go of that profession because it wasn't your joy, even though your parents were so proud of you, was a pretty brave thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. And the rational part of my mind just fought that for a really long time. And I think when you're in the field of law and probably medicine, you're trained to have very little human connection to what you're dealing with as a way of protecting yourself. And that lack of connection, I think, is what then makes it very difficult to continue indefinitely, when that's what I operate from, and I believe Carol operates from, is she touches people in a way because of her ability to connect. And when you're trained to ignore that part, it just leaves you with this rational armor, which feels very safe, but you have to take it off eventually to actually feel fulfilled.
Well, I mean, you've just used the word connection, and knowing your story, which I'm going to ask you to share in a minute, I mean, that connection is without connection to your family, first of all, to yourself, and then to your family members at that, you know, very deep level, rather than a transactional connection, like where we just talk about the things that we need to do and what needs to be done. You've gone way beyond that paradigm of connecting with another into a very deep place of connection. And without that very deep place of connection, nothing would have changed. And so I'm going to ask you about that. So can you tell us about, what happened within your family in relation to illness? I mentioned quite a few illnesses in the introduction, and that's only been over a few years. So can you tell us about that? And just tell us about that to start with.
So my brother-in-law, Anthony, was diagnosed with motor neurone disease in 2018, late 2018. And it was a turning point in our family. It just, I think, hit everyone so hard because we'd spent so long working for the future. And Anthony's diagnosis was just that block in the road that shows you that the future's not always promised. And even though I saw Anthony, we loved him so much, but once he was diagnosed, he was apologising and saying things like when he's not contributing, he doesn't feel like he would want to be here, and just realising that we needed to show him that he was loved, not for what he could do, but for who he was. And that became the journey that we experienced. And not to say there weren't moments of deep sadness and frustration, but there was a level of such deep connection within our family to show him that we wanted him here despite what he could do. And it changed everything. So.
And I also know Anthony's story, and where we would think that when somebody's diagnosed with motor neuron disease, like such a debilitating disease where there's really only one outcome, that, and therefore would have someone believe that they're completely powerless and valueless, as you just said. I know that Anthony's diagnosis was actually the catalyst for him to let go of his own stories of believing that he didn't matter. I remember that moment when he said, I think this is my time to shine. This is a man who didn't believe that he mattered, especially in the context of his brothers, and decided that this time, whilst he's just been diagnosed with motor neuron disease, that it's this time that this time for him to shine. And all that catalyzed in the family, the connection with Anthony and his brothers and your husband, that now I had the privilege of witnessing one of those moments. And I don't even think that I've experienced that level of connection within my family. I don't think many people would experience a level of connection. Your husband, he's a typical Aussie bloke, and Anthony and Mark, typical Aussie blokes, and yet just so beautifully vulnerable and completely. There was no control, no controlling of themselves. It was just a moment I'll never forget. And then what that catalyzed in your family, like decisions about living for now rather than in the future. Before I go back to Carol, I remember you telling me was when Anthony was the last few weeks of his life, and nothing was working. His body wasn't working anymore. He wasn't going. And I asked you, is he afraid? And you said no. Can you tell me what your observation was in terms of why he still stayed even though his body could do nothing?
I think at that point he realised that he was loved, and it sort of still makes me feel emotional to think that illness has to be the catalyst for you to really express that with a family member. But he knew he was valuable to us, regardless of the fact that he was stuck in a bed, unable to move. And I don't doubt in those last weeks that he would have wanted the suffering to end, but he didn't want to die. He knew that no matter what form his body was in, we wanted him here.
Mm.
And it was that real lesson that life is the meaningful experience. Yeah.
I remember when you told me. I even remember where I was sitting when you told me, and you said, I think he's come to realize that regardless of what his body can or can't do, that he's valuable anyway.
Absolutely.
And you and I blubbered at that moment, because I don't know, maybe I'll know a greater truth, I don't know, throughout my life, throughout the coming years of my life. But for me, that was like, I think that's the greatest truth I've come to know, that who we are, despite what we can and can't do, is inherently valuable. That can't be taken away. Like, what a gift. So one more thing I want to say about Anthony, the link will be in the show notes, is that when Anthony decided that it was his time to shine, he wanted to make a contribution to the assisted dying, movement here in Australia. And so he created this beautiful, powerful, vulnerable and strong video where he spoke about his story to that message. Natalie and her family released the video, maybe 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago or so. And how many views are you up to now?
We're just under 80,000.
Wow. Just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the bill's before Parliament at the moment to be voted on. Yeah,
which is the reason why Nat and the family decided to release the video. So please do yourself a favour and look at the video in the show notes. And I hope that you've been inspired by only one of Natalie's stories, because you have many other stories, which we may go to in a minute, that a diagnosis of illness doesn't need to be defined as an experience of suffering only.
Yeah.
And in fact, perhaps the person that's diagnosed with the illness is actually more powerful than they actually realized for what they're actually here to enable. So thanks for sharing. And thank you. So Carol, the intuitive pull to travel the world, despite what your rational mind said, despite what your rational mind still says, what have you seen? What have you seen? What has evolved? What do you now know that you didn't know as a result of letting go of the version of you that didn't want to rock the boat, didn't want to break the rules, didn't want to disrupt how things are done, and then chose to be free of that and follow your heart? What have you seen?
Well, I guess I've seen things that I wouldn't have been able to experience had I just stayed in a hospital setting. And it's a mixed bag. It's not all as I would have hoped for. For example, I was thinking that I'd go out there and I'd find the magic bullet, the golden cure to just, curing cancer or treating cancer. But instead what I found was a richness. And I think that richness comes from a variety of things, but one of them being acceptance. And the acceptance and peace of mind that someone who is experiencing illness can come to can be so much more healing to them and the people around them than the constant fight against the disease itself. So I feel like part of my greatest lesson and what I'm now hoping to bring back is that acceptance, because I think that if healing is to occur, then it actually starts from a level of acceptance. And it doesn't mean we don't do anything. It doesn't mean that we don't treat with the 3D physical modalities we have. It doesn't mean that we lay back and let things happen to us either. But it means that we have other options available to us than just conventional medicine or conventional science. And it's about exploring a holistic approach, that we can't just treat the physical body and expect the miracle. We can, sure, that's part of it, but a miracle is more likely when we attend to the mind and the spirit and the emotional body. So I guess they're the greatest lessons that I've brought back. And the others are, I guess, the practical lessons of seeing, the impact of things like being in nature, plant medicines, psychoenergetic medicine, the role of meditation, the role of intention and belief, nutrition, of course, and diet and lifestyle and supplements. But what always struck my heart was the more magical things. So I guess that's why I focus on the emotional and mental and spiritual body.
It brings tears to my eyes. And, I'm just also, as this interview is unfolding, I'm watching what is here. And what I'm saying is this conversation is like a prescription, an energetic prescription. So absolutely, we are working at a multidimensional level. This is a multidimensional experience we're having here. And as both of you share who you had been and who you let go of and what you have chosen for yourselves, and the wellness that has come from, and the richness, I love that word, and the richness that you both feel, and the privilege of life that you both live, and the impact that you are both having. I feel like we've just, this is an energetic prescription. You've written out the script. We're writing out the script as listeners hear this. Like, the thing also I love about podcasts is it's such a personal experience. It's such an intimate experience being in somebody's ears. And so I'm really trusting that the conversation that has been weaved is working magic in the listeners' ears. So I thank you for both of you for creating this energetic prescription of inquiry, of honesty, of choice, of surrender and letting go, of acceptance, as you said, of letting go of the fight. I was speaking to a client just yesterday who, Carol, who has been diagnosed with breast cancer, and we were talking. She said to me, I don't even like to use the C word. She doesn't actually like to say the word cancer. And I said, you might very well tell me to go away. I said it in a more gruff way than what I just said then. But what the invitation here is that you actually no longer make cancer the enemy, but actually love it for what it is bringing you. And I said, because the more that you make it the enemy, it's like, even if you think about an enemy, like somebody that you don't like, and you give them energy as the enemy, you actually energize the enemy. You give them more power. And said, we don't want to do that. And so I love that you talked about letting go of the fight and coming into acceptance. There was something that I was thinking about. These episodes is so very much born from moments when I go running. It's like I receive so much when I'm running, which I speak to actually on every episode. And one of the things I was thinking about was, the two orientations that we can live life from. The human orientation that just believes that we're this physical body and that's all that we are. You're Carol, you're Natalie, I'm Giselle, we're our personality. We're limited by this, that this is all that we are. And that when we come from our physical orientation only, that we abdicate our power away that is beyond this human vehicle. Like we forget that we actually are even more powerful than this human vehicle. And we forget that we're all connected in this field of intelligence and that who we really are is infinite. We forget that, right? And I know that I have responded to diagnoses of Hashimoto's disease, for example, in the past, simply from that human orientation, where I went to the doctor because the doctor knows better than me, and I do what the doctor says, and I'm forevermore diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease. And that's how I first responded to that diagnosis years ago. And then there's another orientation, and the orientation is that not only do we have a physical human self, but we have a spiritual self. We have a self that's formless. We have a self that we can't see, that we can't touch, that is eternal and infinite. The thing is, when we only orientate from this spiritual self, we believe that who is responsible is the universe or the divine or God. And, you know, this is when we hear people say things like, oh, I'd really love that, but I'll leave it to the universe. I'll leave it to the universe to take care of that. And we actually abdicate away our own self-responsibility and our own agency. And what I'm hearing you say, Carol, is that the most powerful response to a diagnosis of illness is an orientation of the whole of who we are. Absolutely, that we need to take responsibility, stop the fight, go into a place of acceptance, go down the route of conventional 3D medicine when that is required and valuable. And also remember that we're not limited by the body. And then we're not limited by rational intelligence, that who we are is far greater than that. Is there anything that you'd like to say to that?
Yeah, I had never seen it that way either, about the same way we can give our power away to the white coat, the doctor.
Yeah.
We can similarly give our power away to the universe and ask it to just, hey, sort it out.
Yep.
So sure, it's going to, but we forget that we're also made of the universe, or that we are the universe. So we need to meet it where it is, and it'll take us the rest of the way. So I quite like that, because I think there's a tendency in the New Age movement or New Age world to spiritual bypass, or to just kind of surrender. And, you know, I tried surrendering and not much gets done sometimes. So you also have to meet it somewhere. You also have to take a step so it knows which direction you want to take, and so it can take your hand and then keep walking with you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad I mentioned that then, because I was thinking about, you know, I'll complete my story of Hashimoto's. So I handed it over to the white coat initially. And then one day I was watching Netflix and I put on a documentary called Heal. And in Heal, they talk about Hashimoto's disease, and they talk about Ayurvedic medicine and about how Hashimoto's can be reversed. And I didn't even know that was possible. And so the intuitive pull was to go and research and find the perfect Ayurvedic doctor to support me reversing Hashimoto's. And I found her. Her name's Dr. Amy Gajar in Surrey Hills in Sydney. I had my blood tests done, I think maybe 4 months ago, and my Hashimoto's had reversed. I have one number that's still a little bit on the, you know, where it shouldn't be, but only slightly, but all the other numbers have reversed. And I feel so well. You know, the anxiety that I used to feel, which actually was why I went to the doctor. Why am I walking through the shopping centre all of a sudden feeling anxious for no reason? So when that continued to happen over and over again, like in the most random of ways, that's when I went to see the doctor initially. Well, largely I feel really peaceful and calm. And when I was reflecting upon that, I was thinking, is it because I feel calm and peaceful that my Hashimoto's has reversed? Or is it because of the therapy that I've been on with Dr. Amy Gajar? Is it because of that my Hashimoto's has reversed? And it's the chicken and the egg thing, right? I think it's all of that. It's because I've orientated from the whole of me, the human self that I need to take some action there, and the spiritual self that knows that I have choice and that I can be pulled to where that I feel most supported by. So that now brings me to you, Nat, because we've had this conversation about you. So can you just go to where your family has been diagnosed in the last little while and your experience with that diagnosis for yourself, please?
Yeah, so soon after Anthony passed away, my dad, who had been unwell for quite some time, was diagnosed with a degenerative neurological disorder, which is hereditary. So there's a 50% chance that myself and my siblings have inherited the defective gene, and that's just one part of what's been happening, but I'll speak to that. And I haven't been tested to see whether or not I carry the gene, and part of the reason is for me to see beyond my father's diagnosis for myself and decide that regardless of what my genes carry, I'm not making the decision to get tested and then behave in a way that the traditional patient who carries that disease would behave. I just think that we have this perception of disease with how it plays out, and it doesn't have to be that way. So for me, my genes are put to the side, and I'm going to make that decision as to how my life unfolds. And if that becomes part of my journey, then I can see that perfection in that. But I don't feel like that's my story right now for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And if the listeners could actually see the smiles that we all have on our face, it'd bring a smile to your face too. Maybe there's already a smile. What do you think? This is my last question. I think this is my last question. What has been the greatest privilege of your life so far? That when you take, I often talk about living a life of no regrets. Like I want to know that when I'm taking my last breath that I have no regrets at all. So what do you believe is the greatest privilege of your life so far, that you know that when you are taking your last breath, it'll be one of those things that you say, wow, that truly mattered?
For me, I think it's about having truly been there for someone in all of their humanness and seen them beyond what their disease or their beliefs about themselves or the baggage that they carry, and just being able to truly see people for who they are and love them. So for me, that's my greatest privilege to date.
Yeah, and you've done the most amazing job there. My goodness. Thank you.
Thank you.
What about you, Carol?
I think by far and away it's the people I get to serve. I mean, there's no way of saying it that's not going to sound cheesy, and I'm not trying to come across with like a false humility or anything like that, but the privilege of each person I get to connect with and just be here for, to offer whatever I can offer, it feels like the greatest honor to be born into. So, yeah, just
what
that.
A beautiful statement. The greatest honor to be born into. I've never heard that said that way. The greatest honor to be born into. Wow, thank you for that. So, Nat and Carol, thank you so much for accepting this invitation to be interviewed, which is my first interview for the Intuitive Pull podcast. There's nobody else I would have preferred to be with, especially around such a tangible topic of illness. And we know, there's no family that we know that doesn't have some form of illness or unwellness going on within their family. So my intention, I believe, thanks to the two of you, has been well served. Just by being here, number one, people feeling your presence, and also being in your presence and hearing what you've had to say. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being here. And if you would like to connect with Dr. Carol Haddad, I will put Carol's contact details in the show notes. And when Natalie gives me permission to put some contact details around her writing, I will add them to the show notes as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Giselle.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. I trust that you were intuitively pulled. If you liked this episode, please follow this podcast and share the love with your family, friends, and colleagues. Let them know that I'm here. And if you'd like to have more communication with me, join the Intuitive Pull Facebook group, where you'll find details in the show notes, and you can let me know about what pulls you've been receiving by listening to these episodes. Until next time, so much love.